What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to continue our coverage over the X-Men, but at the same time, kind of continue our coverage over Spider-Man as well. I'm going to pick up with Spider-Man and X-Factor Shadowgames. You see, in the 1990s, Marvel had a lot of crossovers when it came to their different properties, especially when it came to Spider-Man and the different X teams. Matter of fact, after this video, we're gonna cover another storyline where is Spider-Man teaming up with the X-Men, really just Beast, but like some of the X-Men as well. And it kind of shows that in the 1990s, Marvel was getting really big on the whole idea of, crossovers. Let's have all these different heroes just cross over in different titles to, get the fans more excited. Now, when it came to Spider-Man X-Factor Shadowgames, it was a separate 3-part miniseries away from the other titles. Now, this storyline does take place before our last X-Factor video, which was issue number 99 and issue number 100. But getting into today's storyline, we do pick up with Spider-Man fighting against a new group of characters called Shadow Force. Now, when it comes to Shadow Force, like I said, they are a new team, but after this storyline, Marvel Comics had never used them ever again. So telling you right now, we don't need to know every single detail about these characters because pretty sure knowing Marvel Comics, if they have not been used now, then most likely they will never be used ever again. Now, like I said though, for Shadow Force, they are the main bad guys for today's storyline. But the question is right now, how in the world do we pick up with Spider-Man fighting against Shadow Force? And so now we got to go back in time to figure out how in the world we got to this moment right here. And so we learned that for Peter Parker, he was on his way over to meeting up with Flash Thompson. And the reason why, because for Flash, he had this boys club and he wanted Peter to stop by and talk about a career as a photographer. Now, Peter did arrive and Peter tried his best to talk to the kids. But one of the kids, they saw Shadow Force. And so for Peter, he knew something was off here. Now, we did see that Shadow Force was looking for Spider-Man. And the question is right now, why in the world were they looking for Spider-Man for? And so that leads us back into the present day where we pick up with Spider-Man fighting against the different members of Shadow Force. Now, there is one character we have to talk about at the end of this video, and that would be Mirrorshade. And the reason why, because Mirrorshade becomes very important for the most parts of the storyline. Now, we do learn that for Mirrorshade, he is kind of like acting and looking like Spider-Man. But on top of that, for Mirrorshade, he does pick up what Spider-Man is thinking. You see, for Peter Parker, he realized while fighting against Shadow Force, Flash and the boys were watching the battle. And of course, that means they are in danger. And so for Peter, he's very upset that Flash would bring the boys near this battle. And so when it comes to Mirrorshade, it was able to pick up what Peter Parker was thinking. But for Mirrorshade, it wants to kill off Flash Thompson right now. And that part right there becomes very important for the second chapter of the storyline. But either way, we also learned that for Shadow Force, they are most likely working for somebody in the government. And the reason why I'm saying that because, well, for Shadow Force, they tell their boss like, hey, listen, we have some witnesses around the scene right now. And I do remember, boss, that you told us to get Spider-Man, but make sure nobody see us complete the job. Well, unfortunately, there are people here who are seeing us battling against Spider-Man. Now, their boss says, listen, who cares? Go ahead, grab him and bring him back over here now. And so you do have Shadow Force being able to defeat Spider-Man and take him away. But now this begins the process of bringing in X-Factor in this storyline. You see, while you have Spider-Man fighting against Shadow Force, you have Flash find Peter Parker's camera. and began to use Peter's camera as a way to get photos of the battle. And so once you have Spider-Man get kidnapped by Shadow Force, you have Flash run straight over to the Daily Bugle to hopefully get somebody there to help out to figure out what happened to Spider-Man. Now, unfortunately, the Bugle is busy. They're like, hey, listen, until your photos do develop, we can't help you at all at the moment. And so you do have Flash call up different hero teams across New York, the Fantastic Four, the Avengers. Unfortunately, everyone is busy. And that leads into a different team who's really in Washington, D.C., and that would be X-Factor. This is how they get called into this situation. But now we pick up with X-Factor, and you have X-Factor kind of at the scene of the crime where Spider-Man was kidnapped at, and begin to look for different clues that could possibly help them figure out what in the world happened to Spider-Man. And after a while, you do have our heroes being able to kind of find different clues that lead into 6 different characters who are apparently locked up in 6 different prisons across the world. Now, when it comes to Havoc, he does check the prisoner database, and it says right now all 6 prisoners are still locked up in their prison cells. But the problem is they just found clues that says otherwise. And so for Havoc, he's wondering what in the world is going on here. But now we have to jump back over to the Daily Bugle. Now, when we do, we pick up with J. Jonah Jameson and also Robbie Robertson. Now, you have the 2 characters trying their best to figure out what is the story here when it comes to Shadow Force kidnapping Spider-Man. And they're currently looking at the photos that Flash Thompson took earlier. The problem is the FBI, they walk into the room and say, hey, listen, your story is not going to happen at all. We came here to completely shut you guys down. And matter of fact, the photos you have there, we're going to take those photos as well. Now, this could be a callback to what happened earlier. Because remember, when it came to Shadow Force, they were supposed to grab Spider-Man, but to make sure nobody sees them at all. And of course, Flash did. And so this could be the whole idea that Shadow Force is a government team. And right now, the FBI and other agents across the world are trying their best to make sure the word does not get out about Shadow Force. But the question is right now, why? But now we have to transition over to Peter Parker. Now, the people who are controlling Shadow Force, they believe that Spider-Man is still completely knocked out. And even if he does wake up, the binds they have him in should be able to keep him in place. But of course, you do have Peter Parker wake up and being able to break free. And you didn't have Peter being able to sneak his way around this base to hopefully learn what in the world is going on, but to also learn the origin of Shadow Force. And so you have Peter Parker find out that Shadow Force is part of Project Homegrown. Now, Project Homegrown is a old Marvel concept, and let me explain. You see, when it comes to Project Homegrown, after Steve Rogers had disappeared at the end of World War II, you had the American government go out of their way and try to create their own superheroes for America. And that kind of led into so many different types of projects. But when it comes to Shadow Force, they are the latest step in the idea of creating their own type of heroes. Now, as we saw earlier for X-Factor, they realized that there were some prisoners who were involved. And let me explain. You see, what they are doing right now is going to different prisons across the world and use those prisoners as a way to help test out their new types of projects for Project Homegrown. And so for Shadow Force, they were just the latest prisoners being used for a new project. Now, for Shadow Force, they don't have powers. They never did. Their powers come from the harness they wear on their body. You see, their harnesses kind of give them some chemicals that then gives them abilities for a short period of time. Now, here's the thing. For Shadow Force, they were not supposed to be used as field agents, only as test subjects, which means somebody had kind of stepped over some lines and say, you know what, let's go ahead and use Shadow Force as a way of field agents to capture other heroes and then learn more about those other heroes' powers to continue our work here at Project Homegrown. Something else I do want to mention when it comes to Shadow Force is that they're being brainwashed and drugged heavily. And the reason why, because it makes it easier for the people who are part of Project Homegrown to control them. Now, we also learned that currently Project Homegrown is being led by a character known as General Sharp. Now, General Sharp is going to be somewhat important for the later chapters of this video. But either way, we also got to shift our focus over to the character known as Mirror Shade. Now, Mirror Shade is a character who has the ability to copy other people's abilities, but sometimes he is able to kind of pick up what they are currently thinking. And so for Peter Parker earlier, he hated Flash what he did earlier by putting those kids in danger that Peter thought of killing Flash, but not really meaning it. But for Mirror Shade, he's kind of like, I picked up what Spider-Man was thinking, killing off Flash Thompson. And so currently for Mirror Shade, he wants to kill off Flash Thompson. And it kind of shows that Mirror Shade is not really okay in the head. But either way, he does leave the base of Project Homegrown to go after Flash. And Peter now knows about it. So his goal is to go after Mirror Shade. But the problem is a huge fight breaks out at the base of Project Homegrown. And the reason why? Because X-Factor was able to figure out where Spider-Man was at. And they came all the way over here to save his butt. But you have Peter the entire time trying to leave to go chase after Mirror Shade. But the problem is X-Factor is now fighting against the rest of the members of, well, Shadow Force. And so as we get into the second chapter of Shadowgames, we pick up with Spider-Man telling X-Factor like, hey, listen guys, I gotta go after Mirror Shade. That guy just dipped out and right now he's going after somebody close to me, which is Flash Thompson. And so you have X-Factor tell Spider-Man like, hey man, listen, we understand, go ahead and dip out now and hopefully you can stop him. Now, right after you have Spider-Man being able to get away, you didn't have General Sharp freak out. And the reason why, because he got told that Spider-Man had left, but Spider-Man had also taken information that he had took out of computers earlier when he was learning everything going on with Shadow Force. And so you have Sharp tell Shadow Force, hey, listen, you guys need to stop fighting against X-Factor and go after Spider-Man. He has classified information. And so you have Shadow Force being able to just take down X-Factor pretty quickly and then start going after Spider-Man next. Now, something we have to remember that when it comes to X-Factor in the early to mid 1990s, X-Factor was working for the American government. And so when you have X-Factor say, hey, listen, even though we lost the battle against Shadow Force, let's go ahead and continue to chase them down. But then they're confronted by General Sharp, who then tells them like, no, you're going to stand down because technically they both do work for the American government. And it's right now Sharp saying, listen, I'm a higher ranked person than you are. And I'm telling you right now, you need to stand down when it comes to going after Shadow Force. Now, you do have Spider-Man being able to find Mirror Shade. Now, Mirror Shade has been copying the powers of Spider-Man. Not completely like, hey, the web shooters, the web shooters are not really a power of Peter Parker in the 1990s. They were devices on his wrist. But the way you have Mirror Shade moving, his agility, is all coming from copying the powers of Spider-Man. Now, you have Mirror Shade be a tad bit faster, a tad bit stronger, and being able to get away from Spider-Man. Now, for Spider-Man, there's no buildings out here in the middle of the woods to swing from. So Mirror Shade has the chance to get far away from Spider-Man. Like I said, Peter knows that Mirror Shade is heading over to New York to go after Flash Thompson. Now, Mirror Shade was able to get on a train, and Peter was not able to get on that train. But luckily for Peter, there was another train heading towards New York just 3 minutes after the one Mirror Shade had taken. Now, right after you have Spider-Man being able to get on a train heading towards New York, well, Shadow Force is also on the train as well. Now, you have Peter Parker trying to blend in by wearing a huge jacket covering his suit, but at the same time, you have X-Factor heading over to New York because X-Factor knows if Spider-Man is chasing down Mirrorshade, who's heading over to New York, and the rest of Shadow Force is chasing after Spider-Man, then everybody's heading towards New York. And so you have X-Factor flying over there as well. Now you also have Forge trying his best to get more information about what Sharp and Shadow Force is really up to behind the scenes. Now we already know, but for X-Factor, they don't have all the information just yet. But shifting our focus back over to Peter Parker, you have Peter try to call up Flash Thompson by taking somebody's cell phone. And he was hoping that Flash would answer to warn Flash like, hey, listen, you need to get somewhere safe. This thing is coming after you, and sooner or later, it might try to kill you. But unfortunately, Flash does not answer the phone. Now, for Shadow Force, they're tired of trying to find Spider-Man. And so you have Shadow Force begin to start just attacking the train, which of course puts innocent people in danger. And so Peter has no choice but to go ahead and be Spider-Man to fight against Shadow Force. Now, for the battle between Spider-Man and also Shadow Force, you have Spider-Man being able to detach part of the train where you had all the innocent people who were on the train kind of getting away from the battle between Spider-Man and also Shadow Force. And so for our two parties, they're on a different part of the train now that's still attached to the engine. And so their train is still moving on while all the innocent people are kind of stuck in the middle of nowhere. Either way, for Spider-Man, it was him saying, I have no choice but to go ahead and do that as a way to protect all those innocent people. Now, you have Spider-Man trying his best to fight against Shadow Force, but the problem is the dude is outnumbered very easily when it comes to this group of characters. But luckily for Spider-Man, X-Factor had arrived once again to help him out. Now, you don't have Spider-Man working with X-Factor to fight against Shadow Force. And the reason why, because they're so far away now from the Project Wide Awake base, they're no longer being controlled by the government. And so with these characters no longer being controlled, they realize they now have free will once again. And so you have the leader of the group say, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and dip out now. And so they do. Now for X-Factor, he's kind of wondering what in the world is going on here. And you have Peter tell X-Factor like, listen, they were so far away from the base of Project Wide Awake, they now have regained their free will and doing their own thing. Now you also have Peter tell X-Factor like, hey, listen, we got to get over to New York. And the reason why, because one of their members is going after Flash Thompson and plans on killing Flash Thompson off. But now we have to jump over to the final chapter of today's video. And we pick up with J. Jonah Jameson on the phone with Joy Mercado. Now, when it comes to Joy Mercado, she first appeared in Moon Knight issue number 33. Now, also, she is a reporter for the Daily Bugle. Now, her latest assignment was given to her by JJ to kind of figure out what in the world is going on with Shadow Force. Now, when it comes to Joy, she was able to figure out that Shadow Force is part of Project Wide Awake. But here comes the big problem with that. The whole entire project is supposed to be under wrap. The public is not supposed to find out at all. But the problem is right now, it seems like the public is going to find out everything about Project Wide Awake, starting with Shadow Force. But now we can jump back over to Spider-Man. And when we do, we see Spider-Man being able to just make it in time to protect Flash Thompson from Mirrorshade, one of the members of Shadow Force. Now, this battle is really short-lived. And the reason why, because it's not just Spider-Man, it's also X-Factor as well. And so for Mirrorshade, it's having a hard time trying to copy all the different powers of Spider-Man, but also X-Factor as well. Now, you do have another member of Shadow Force being able to grab Mirrorshade and get the heck out of there. And so for Spider-Man and also also X-Factor, they realize that most likely when it comes to Shadow Force, they have gone back to Washington, D.C., the home base for Project Homegrown. And so you have our heroes head back over to Washington, D.C. And so while you have our heroes heading over to Project Homegrown, you did have our heroes be called up by Forge. Now, when it comes to Forge, he's telling our heroes like, hey, listen, I just got word that Shadow Force had just taken over the entire base of Project Homegrown. And the reason why, because they want to be forgiven for all the crimes that they had done. Basically, their records to be sponged. Because remember, this whole entire project of Shadow Force was to take prisoners and use those prisoners as test subjects to see if they're able to give people powers with these special types of harnesses. And so you have our heroes rush over to hopefully stop Shadow Force before things can get worse, because the entire base they had taken over is holding a bunch of weapons that they could use to fight off an entire army of people. Now, as we jump over to the base of Project Homegrown, we pick up with Shadow Force. Now, they're watching the news at the moment, and they are seeing that you have General Sharp kind of just spreading lies about what exactly went down in this storyline by technically saying that a group of prisoners had recently broken out of prison, stole their technology for their own personal use to kind of get back at the American government. But in reality, we know the truth, that when it came to Project Homegrown, they took those prisoners out of their cells and brainwashed them, drugged them for their own personal use of their experiment. But either way, it's now Sharp in the government trying their best to trick the media into believing them. Now, you do have X-Factor arrive. Now, when they do arrive, you do have different people who also work for the government tell X-Factor they have no rights to go in at all. But you have Polaris using her ability to say, hey, listen, we got to go in there. You need a superhero team like us plus Spider-Man to deal with characters like those. And so they go inside the base. Now, you do have Spider-Man tell X-Factor like, hey, listen, when it comes to Shadow Force, they don't really have powers. Their powers come from the harnesses that they are currently wearing. And so you have Spider-Man realize that those harnesses are kind of like batteries. Sooner or later, they need to be recharged. And so that is why they went over to this base Project Homegrown to get their harness recharged so that they can use their powers once again. And so for Spider-Man, his main goal is to find the power source of this base, shut it off, and once they do that, the harnesses that Shadow Force is wearing should also be shut down as well. Except there is a problem. You see, for Peter, he realized that they had rigged the entire place to blow up. And the reason why? Because these prisoners do not want to go back to prison at all. Now, I want to get into the whole idea of the death of Mirashade, because for me personally, I found it pretty funny, even though it is completely messed up. But let me explain. So for Mirashade, the way he was killed off is that, remember, he has the ability to copy other people's powers. But when it comes to Jimmy Maddox, who has the ability to copy himself, you have Mirashade try to copy his powers. And of course, it led him trying to split into two people, which of course killed him off just like that. And so for me personally, it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, Mirashade is officially dead now. Now, the ending of this book is pretty wild to me. And the reason why, because we pick up with Peter Parker talking to Hardline. Now, Hardline is the leader of Shadow Force. But you have Peter say, hey, Hardline, why are you trying to fight against us for? Like, why try to fight against X-Factor and Spider-Man? We're here to help expose what the government has been doing to you guys. So why not try to help us to expose the government? And so you have Hardline use his powers as a way to protect everyone in the building as the entire building gets blown up. Now, once you do have our heroes show that they have survived, we kind of find out that X-Factor is not really able to share any information of what Project Homegrown is all about. But you know who can? Peter Parker, because he does not work for the government at all. And let's not forget, the man earlier did collect information of what they were doing when it came to the American government. And so you have Peter give that info straight over to the media. And so now all those different types of secrets are going to be exposed. And this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.